In this episode, I'm joined by Martin Koci, who is a post-doctoral researcher at the Institute for Philosophy at the University of Vienna. In this episode, we discuss his book, Thinking Faith After Christianity, a theological reading of Jan Patočka's Phenomenological philosophy, alongside discussions on finitude, freedom, modernity, and more. I'd like to say a big thank you to my paid patrons and subscribers for making all of this work possible. And if you would like to support Hermitix, gain access to some exclusive content, or just support the podcast to keep it going, then please find links in the description below. Otherwise, please enjoy. So, Martin Koci, thanks very much for joining us on Hermitix podcast. We are going to be discussing your book, which was published in 2020, Thinking Faith After Christianity, a theological reading of Jan Patočka's Phenomenological philosophy. So we're going to be discussing loosely the work of Jan Patočka, who's sort of a somewhat forgotten phenomenologist, but we're also going to be discussing his work in light of theology and his understanding of Christianity, and the fact that his work, even though it wasn't Christian really in explicitly, your book is really tackling the fact that behind the scenes, he's written a book called Heretical Essays, quite tongue-in-cheek, and there's always this dialogue going on. But before we just jump in with the book and Patočka, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do.
Well, thank you for having me on this podcast. I'm greeting you from Vienna, Austria, where I'm based at the University of Vienna. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Philosophical Institute here at the university. By training, I'm a theologian. I did my PhD in Leuven at the Faculty of Theology, but I was always kind of at the intersection between theology and philosophy, or the postmodern debates on Christianity and its current situation. So I'm continuing this path right now, the Philosophical Institute of the University of Vienna, and Patočka is still with me.
Very good, very good. Well, we'll jump in sort of straight away with the figure of Patočka, because I have to ask you the Hermitix question. You can place three figures, living or dead, into a room and listen in on the conversation. Who do you pick? And Jan Patočka has already sat in there waiting for your three to arrive. Who do you want to listen to?
That's a pretty tough question, because there's so many interesting thinkers with whom or to whom I would like to listen to. But if I have to pick three, I would pick Emmanuel Falk, another important figure for my work, the French phenomenologist, recent author, and then Jean-Luc Nancy, another Frenchman, and Charles Taylor, maybe because of my interest in the situation of Christianity in a so-called postmodern context. So these three, would, together with Jan Patočka, would be my choice.
Okay. I mean, just to frame off that room, do you mind if I ask, are you a Christian?
I am.
Okay. So this is sort of a serious, a personal thing for you. So where do you see that room? What's the thread which is tying that room together?
I think different perspectives on Christianity, what Christianity is and why Christianity is still with us today, even though we talk so much about the end of Christianity, the process of secularization, the traditionalization, the individualization, fragmentization of our lives. And Christianity is still with us. And that's the point of Jean-Luc Nancy, who was self-proclaimed atheist, of course, but very much interested in Christianity. That's the point of Charles Taylor, who is a Christian, more kind of sociological, historically oriented in his analysis, but in his opus magnum, A Secular Age, delivering convincing and compelling argument, like Christianity is still with us, even though it's almost impossible to believe in Christianity today. And then Jan Patočka is the one who was always interested in Christianity, even though, as you've said quite rightly, he was kind of circling around Christianity, never really entering the room, so to say. And then Emmanuel Falk, who is a philosopher, but also a theologian by his training, teaching at the Catholic Institute in Paris. So the most theological place in France, which is at the same time the country of laïcité, right? The culture which wants to explicitly detach itself from Christianity. So, and all of those figures, they discuss Christianity from different reasons, with different goals, but they are there and they are talking about this fascinating question.
I mean, it is a fascinating question. It's almost like a dialogue between that, thinkers, as you say, who have dealt with the fact that there was for such a long time. I mean, really, it's the crisis of modernity, right? But for such a long time, people felt that need to do as Patočka did, of sort of tiptoe around Christianity as opposed to deal with it head on. So I mean, maybe that's in a certain sense these figures will come back in, I'm sure. But in a certain sense, I guess that's an interesting place to start. Where do we historically and philosophically situate Patočka? But also because Christianity isn't really, his academic aim. Personally for him, biographically, I should say. What is his relationship with Christianity as well, on a personal level?
Mm-hmm. So, Patočka was born in 1907 and died 1977. So, you can say he lived through all the major events of the 20th century. He experienced 2 world wars. He experienced Cold War coming after the Second World War. He experienced a totalitarian regime in his home country, which didn't allow him to teach at university, even though he was definitely the best philosophical mind of his time in former Czechoslovakia, what nowadays is Czech Republic. He experienced Soviet invasion in 1968, something we are experiencing right now when one country, a big superpower, invades another country. So he had that experience as a direct observant of this. So this is his historical context. So quite turbulent times. Then, philosophically speaking, he was a modern philosopher. He was a direct student of Edmund Husserl, the founder of phenomenology. He studied with Heidegger. In the interwar period, he traveled Europe. He was in Germany before World War II. He was in France studying with best philosophers of the time, and he brought phenomenology back to his country, to Czechoslovakia. So in this sense, he was very modern and very open-minded to new philosophical streams. At the same time, he received very classical philosophical education. He knew very well Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, medieval thinkers, well-phrased philosopher, fluent in German, French, Russian, other languages. So quite an encyclopedic mind. And having said that, he wasn't allowed to be at the university or only for brief periods of time. He was regular university teacher. Otherwise, he was doing kind of side jobs, so to say, to earn his daily bread. And in his not free time, but basically his whole life is philosophy, reading, writing, and living philosophy in the end.
So I'm right in thinking he's one of the last students of Husserl.
That's right.
It's really the end. So the end of. I mean, Husserl fascinates me. He's one of these figures, much like Bergson, who in his day, Husserl is huge. Everyone's talking about it, and now Husserl is sometimes, unfortunately, relegated to, he was the guy who founded phenomenology, right? And so, it's always pays to remember that in the day, being a direct descendant in a way of Husserl probably would have been a pretty big deal.
No, that's absolutely right. And Patočka was very fond of Husserl, even though philosophically speaking, he might be closer to Heidegger's perspective on phenomenology in the end. But on the personal level, he was very attached to Husserl, and even after the development in Germany before World War II, Patočka tried to get Husserl to Prague to sort of secure his place at the university, because in Prague at that time there was still Czech and German-speaking university. So he tried to bring him from Nazi Germany to, at that time, still free Czechoslovakia. So they were very close to each other. And Patočka wrote an introduction to Husserl's Phenomenology, which is a very fine interpretation of Husserl and kind of a canonical textbook for students of phenomenology, I would say.
It's funny with Husserl, there's so much although many of the biographies of the people who studied with him, his pupils, he was such a cantankerous figure, but they all developed this extremely, the master, was it the nickname. So, I mean, you got to do something right to get that. So, in what sense, we were speaking about the history and the philosophy there. In what sense does the theology come in for Patočka?
Okay. Yes, of course, this is a thought-provoking question, I would say, because Patočka was always clear that he was not a theologian. Even though it's striking that his very first published academic paper, is entitled Theology and Philosophy. And his very last paper, his last finished paper, which was published during his life, is in its title, it bears this on philosophy of religion. And when Patočka says religion, he always thinks of Christianity. So again, you can say that at the beginning and at the end of his professional work, there is this idea, this interest in religion, in Christianity. But on the other hand, he's very clear that he's a philosopher. And he says in one of his earlier essays that a philosopher never helps theologians. And I mean, it sounds mean, but he just wants to say that those disciplines are autonomous and they are different. For Patočka, theology comes in as a very interesting mode of thinking about a human situation in the world. And that's why he keeps coming back. And of course, when he tries to define what is philosophy, he has to somehow position himself to theology or other disciplines. But theology is one of his major dialogue partners. He read all those theologians of his time. He definitely read Bultmann. He read he had an awareness of the debate of the time in theology, and he perceived quite rightly that theology is developing itself. It's not just a petrified, kind of weird discipline for freaks. It's thinking, it's real thinking. And Patočka was interested in theology as a certain mode of thinking. In another essay, he even says that theology, in his opinion, is a sort of the highest thinking, the most difficult thinking. It doesn't mean that theology is more important than philosophy. No, not for him. But it means that it is a relevant mode of thinking. It is something we have to be aware of if we want to understand ourselves and our position in the world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, am I right in thinking that the big difference for Patočka was really to do with knowledge and where knowledge comes from? So with philosophy, you're working from the fact that truth isn't revealed, there isn't this certified truth to begin with, and for theology, you are beginning from the fact there is this truth, God, faith, belief, and you begin from that. And so in that sense, for him, there's sort of an irreconcilability, because in one sense, truth is given for theology, and then you work from that and work it out. Whereas for philosophy, you're saying, well, we don't even know what we have, right?
Patočka is a phenomenologist, so he has to start with the experience. Mm-hmm. And this is what inspires me, right? That even though I'm a theologian, I wouldn't say that the truth is simply given. Of course, we do have certain sources of what we consider to be true in theology. But the way we approach these sources is still from within this world. We have to somehow start with our experience, because even though we take, and now it's me, it's not Patočka talking, but even though we take, for instance, the scripture as the source for theology, we have to, and even though we take into consideration in a Catholic tradition that it is inspired, so there is the human author and the divine inspiration at work, even though we have to say that we have no other experience of this revelation but our human experience. And that's why phenomenology and Patočka's way of doing philosophy is important, for me, because he tries somehow to make sense of this. What does it mean that we approach all those things from the perspective of being in the world, so to say, with Heidegger? So this is really where I see the connection point between Patočka's phenomenology, or phenomenology in general, and theology.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. That does make sense. Just jumping a little bit back, just because I skipped a little question there with regard to Patočka himself. I mean, so he's called, and you emphasize this 2 or 3 times in your book. So I figured this was maybe a little key and, insight into Patočka's thinking. He was named or known as the Socrates of the 20th century. So what was really meant by this, and where did this come from?
Mm-hmm. There is even a documentary movie. It's called The Socrates of Prague, and it's about Patočka. And the reason for that is the destiny of his personal and professional life. So Patočka, as I've already mentioned, he's an archetype of philosopher. The classical education, the history of philosophy, but also constant thinking how to make his philosophy publicly relevant. I have to say that when I say publicly relevant, his goal never was to be kind of public figure. But he, in a Socratic way of thinking, he's convinced that philosophy has an impact on polis, on the community, on your relationships, on your being with the others. And similarly to Socrates, Patočka was asking many questions, problematizing everything. Nothing is sacred to a philosopher, so to say. And at certain point, at the end of his life in the 1970s, he probably asked too many questions, and he was actually accused from the same things as Socrates was, that he was spoiling the youth with too many questions, too many problems, and he paid the same price as Socrates. So, of course, he was not killed, but let's say he was bullied by the secret police of former Czechoslovakia, the communist police, and in consequence of those treatments, which were not violent, but still he was a man in his age already. So it left an imprint on his health, and because of his public engagement, which was the engagement in the so-called Charter 77, human rights movement. Nothing, very political, but nothing like partisan politics. So it ended as ended, and therefore he's called the Socrates of Prague because of his erudition, because of his way of leading the philosophical life, vita philosophica.
So did his turn to theology, of taking theology seriously, or as you've put it, theological phenomenology, did this play a role in his being deemed this Socratic figure, in that, amidst the modern crises, amidst communism, I'm assuming, he was taking theology very seriously. Even if he was doing it on the outside, it's clear that, he was taking it seriously.
For me, if I speak for myself, I would make this connection. The overall reception of Patočka doesn't go this direction, I would say. Because my work on Patočka and his kind of rapprochement or relationship to theology or Christianity, it's something what I try to dig out from Patočka's work, because it is there. And if you are Christian, or if you read him from a certain theological background, then you have all those intuitions. Okay, this sounds like Jean-Luc Marion. This sounds like Jean-Yves Lacoste, or all those other figures, philosophers, who are explicitly interested in Christianity. Patočka is interested in Christianity, but sometimes you have to look for this debate, not exactly in between the lines, but it scarce notes here and there, something about Christianity, something about theology, something about theologians of the time and having opinion on that. So you have to look for it. But once you start to build up a structure of his thought, you see that he was pretty consequent in his thoughts on Christianity, and was developing gradually. It never left him, and I believe for a reason, Christianity never left him.
So do you think in a certain sense that's what he was doing throughout his life, was actually not so much a reconciliation? And that's one question I have, is whether or not for Patočka, philosophy and theology ever really have any sense, should have a dialogue, or could have a reconciliation where they work together. But in the same sense, it seems that his lifespan, in that sense that you personally are reading it, is him trying to find a way, you could even say perhaps to redeem Christianity with regard to phenomenology.
I think what redeem, that might be perhaps too strong. I wouldn't put this into Patočka's mouth, but I think what he's trying to do is to understand what's the importance of Christianity for us, and that's Patočka. And thinking with Patočka, I think we can ask the question: what kind of Christianity is coming to us after certain mode of Christianity has ended, with pre-modernity, or even with modernity and secularization. And I think Patočka is well aware that the importance of that Christianity is very important, not just for an individual human being as kind of belief, because Patočka says you have to have some beliefs in order to be able to live a meaningful life. So, but that would be too schematic, too simple for him. So I think he really finds Christianity as one of the major intellectual streams, and not only intellectual, just existential streams of our civilization. Patočka is in a way very Eurocentric or Western oriented. So of course we may debate whether his thought is applicable to other cultures as well. But for our context, being in Europe today, I think his ideas on Christianity are very important, because he sees Christianity as something existential, something we have to confront with, because otherwise we do not understand who we are and where are we going.
So just to use that, I mean, in the same sense that we're confronting Christianity in the Patočka sense, do you think you can sort of use that same method of confrontation to confront phenomenology? Is that what he's doing, in the sense that he's trying to use, could there have ever been a same method to deal with both of these paths?
I think he applies certain phenomenological methodology to understand Christianity. And as I've said, when you are doing phenomenology, you are interested in experience and in the structures of experience. What makes your life meaningful, and what actually of course you can do kind of descriptive phenomenology, just describing what appears to you, but you can also move beyond this descriptive mode of doing phenomenology and trying to formulate something what Patočka would call a phenomenological philosophy. That's and again, this is more like this Socratic moment, that it's not just a pure academic discipline, and now ivory tower of an intellectual. It is a way of conducting your life. And Christianity is the incorporation, the internalization of certain insights you can get from phenomenology. But phenomenology is a rational reflection, right? The word reflection is very important for phenomenology. And even though Heidegger says you have the world before reflection, that's the result of your reflection is this. And what Patočka, I think, is trying to do with Christianity, especially in his heretical essays, where you can find some intriguing notes on Christianity. For instance, that Christianity is the greatest and unsurpassed human drive. Or not human drive, the drive that enables humans to struggle against decadence. Yeah, so that's something great. But at the same time, he says Christianity is something unthought through. So what he's trying to do is, I think, to say, okay, Christianity understands, but not intellectually. You don't have to be an intellectual. Christianity incorporates certain, way of dealing with life, with the world. It somehow embraces certain experiences, the experience of finitude, the experience of meaninglessness, or the questioning the meaning, and without having necessarily reflection, rational reflection, philosophical reflection on those questions. Because phenomenology and philosophy in general, it's an intentional reflection on what does it mean to be a finite human being. It is intentional asking question of meaning. It is intentional grappling with our being in the world. Mm-hmm. And Christianity, I think, what Patočka understands as the importance of Christianity is doing it without, and offering it to, so to say, masses, sort of Nietzsche's Platonism for people, but without this pejorative tone in that. But for Patočka, this is something positive, that Christianity enables humans to struggle against decadence without turning them into philosophers, without turning them into intellectuals, but making from people spiritual beings, so to say.
Okay, that's really interesting to bring in intentionality into Christianity in that sense. So I mean, and this is the big question, and it was the part of your book that I found just so fascinating. On the one side we have this Christian, we have this existential form, and on the other side you have the phenomenological form of existentialism, in a certain sense of trying to get to the truth through experience, through that, and you draw this together in what you call the four figures of crisis with respect to the crises of modernity, or the crisis of modernity. And you really, the thread which is running through Patočka's work in that sense is one of taking reason, human reason, as extremely seriously, and I mean, to a certain degree, does he have an original, you said before that he's, well versed in the classics, Plato, Aristotle. Does he have someone he almost looks back to as someone, a time when we did take reasons more seriously as this, foundation, and now he's looking at these figures of crisis and sort of saying, look, we're all talking about reason once again?
Well, first of all, what is for him this crisis? Crisis is the moment of discerning. Yeah, mm-hmm. We have that's the moment when we are asking questions, and phenomenology shows. I think that's why Patočka takes phenomenology as his major reference point, because phenomenology shows that crisis is something natural. The crisis of reason is something natural. Of course, Patočka takes Descartes as the one who really established reason and rational reflection as, and that's from Husserl, of course, as the pillar of our civilization. But he explains that reason, it's not a modern invention, that we've been rational beings since antiquity, mm-hmm. And history starts with philosophy, with asking questions, with using reason properly, with the liberation from myth, so to say. And then crisis therefore is the default position, because once we use reason, we cannot but end up in thinking that we are in a crisis constantly. But I think for Patočka, again, this is important, because crisis is not a tragedy. Crisis is a challenge to be faced, and the goal or the solution for this challenge is not to create a perfect world without crisis. The solution is just to go through it, to ask proper questions which we have to ask today, which are different questions today than they were yesterday, and take actions to act. And religion comes in as the other of reason, not the opponent of reason, the other of reason, something what makes you aware that reason and your rational reflection has certain limits, and religion helps you to realize it. And again, that's something very similar, as I've said before, about Christianity and phenomenology. Christianity sort of knows it, but now I do not talk about the epistemic knowledge. It's more like the inherent structure of being Christian, that you are aware of this other of reason, which doesn't turn you into anti-rational or irrational person necessarily. Of course, sometimes it happens in Christianity too. But this kind of dynamic between being rational and being religious, which means just to be open to the other of reason, it's very important. And yeah, Christianity is a perfect instance, but we don't have to take Christianity only. Patočka talks about Platonism, and Platonism, it's a philosophy, but it's also kind of religious practice. You would say, right? Because you have the group of disciples talking together, performing in a way rituals to get to some kind of knowledge. And Patočka's teaching on Platonism is that it's about ideas, but the point is not to get to the idea which is set in stone somewhere outside the world, outside history. The point of the whole process of being a Platonic philosopher is that dialogue, this awareness of the gap between us and the idea, between the point in which we find ourselves and the point where we are going. And once we are there at that point, we again have to start again from beginning and continue. So for Patočka, there is no perfect world without crisis, and Christianity knows that. And Christianity, in his view, I would say, is not about creating a perfect world or offering metaphysical happy ends to human life. It is this awareness that the world is a dirty place, and we have to live in this world, not flee to another world.
So do you think one big reason for the fact he just couldn't quite leave Christianity behind was because, he does see Christianity as having that key relationship with reason, and so we can't just sort of relegate it and say, look, that's gone, that's useless. They are, they're dealing with the crisis just as much as atheists.
I think so, because in one of his texts on super civilization, where he discusses, super civilization means modernity, in short. So when he discusses modernity, he says, okay, there are two versions of modernity. One very radical, which just takes reason as the only thing we have. We have to rationalize everything, and we have to put aside religion, we have to put aside our emotions, we have to put aside everything. Everything is rational, everything is set in stone. It's just a matter of time and our effort to get what the truth is. And you can, of course, he talks about his experience of being in a totalitarian regime and a class struggle as kind of iron law of history. But you can apply it to anything, like scientific objectivism, or I don't know, whatever takes just reason, as the militant atheism, for instance, would be another example. So he thinks, okay, once you take reason and in kind of agnostic way, that it is the tool to master everything, then we are in troubles. And of course, then he discusses in heretical essays the war as the outburst of this absolutization of reason. And he understands the 20th century is one big war. in different stages, the First World War, the Second World War as the continuation of the same, and the Cold War as another stage of the same. Because we think we can resolve the crisis forever. We can establish the world peace. We can establish a classless society. We can establish perfect capitalist society. Whatever idea you absolutize, and you are absolutizing because you are rationalizing it as the best solution ever, then we are running into troubles. And Christianity is something different. In Patočka's opinion, Christianity knows about fragility, about vulnerability. Christianity presents its God incarnate as the one who seemed to fear die, who is very existential, very much in this world. And this is where we have to start for him.
So what's the difference between a civilization and a super civilization?
Oh, I think he uses this term super civilization, which is quite weird. And there is a book written just on this concept in Patočka by my friend Jakub Homolka. So there are better experts than I am on this. But I think super civilization is modernity. Civilization which tries to unify everything into one coherent narrative, or just one coherent system. And he distinguishes between moderate super civilization and radical super civilization. So moderate modernity and radical modernity. Radical modernity is totalitarian, oppressive. In the name of reason, in the name of whatever idea, you oppress, you take away freedom. Moderate super civilization, it's still modernity. It's still this kind of society still attempts to master everything, but is aware that there is something beyond the horizon, beyond the scope of its own powers. And Patočka talks in this context about vertical thinking. And he says moderate civilization does not exclude vertical thinking. And that's a reference to what we've been discussing all the time, religion. Religion, which gives you this corrective. Reason is not just the one thing, or human person in this world is not just, it's not everything. Once it becomes everything, nothing is the result.
So in a simple way, I mean, it's quite strange. I mean, I guess in a simple way, in the sense that, maybe in the medieval period, atheism would have certainly been heretical because Christianity is the solidified norm. So now, because of this radical modernity, Christianity becomes, or that form of rationalization with relation to faith and belief, that becomes heretical just by its very nature of being the outside of radical modernity.
Yeah, I think that's pretty right. Yeah,
that's a nice way of putting it. So as I understand it, this relates to freedom for Patočka, because then freedom becomes something else entirely, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So freedom is what you try to achieve, but freedom is not kind of permanent state. No, it should be your state of being in this world. But it is not like that you go this way or that way and you arrive at freedom. It's a constant fight. It's a constant fight for your freedom. And what helps you in this fight is the consciousness of this other of reason, the other of yourself. Yeah, just the fact that there are other people and you are in intersubjective relationships with them, that your being in the world is also being with the others. It's all part of what he understands under the rubric of freedom. And freedom, of course, comes with responsibility. And the responsibility comes from giving response to myself, to my questions, to others, and to the other, if you like, whatever the other for you is. It can be a Platonic idea, or it can be God. But this awareness of having these gaps it's very important for him. And those gaps between me and the other, those are the most important spaces in which we can find the truth in the end. The truth which is not set in stone forever, the truth which is not ahistorical for him. Everything is historical. History is very, very important. But the thing is that Patočka does not believe that the history has just one big meaning. He believes we have to strive for meaning constantly because of crisis, because we find ourselves in crisis. And crisis is not first and foremost something external coming to us. We live through our internal conflict. He talks about polemos, the Heraclitean notion of polemos, which means war, but it also means conflict. And when he talks about this, he thinks about one simple and yet very difficult thing, and that's human finitude. This grappling with finitude, which is, in his opinion, one universal experience we all have, even though we experience it differently. So this kind of sense of universality does not neglect our particularities. And of course, we have different approaches and attitudes how to grapple with finitude. Someone is Christian, someone is atheist, someone is Buddhist, whatever. But the thing is that this grappling with finitude, with this internal conflict, with this internal crisis, we all have to bear with ourselves. That's something what can create our intersubjective relationships. It's something what can create community. And again, if I bring in Christianity, thinking with Patočka doesn't say it so explicitly, but I think his words about Christianity as the greatest and unsurpassed drive which helps humans to struggle against decadence points to the direction that Christianity is a certain mode of being in the world, mode of being which is aware of this internal conflict, this existential conflict within the human being, and tries somehow to solve it. And of course, you have the traditional Christianity which would point to life eternal. This is not kind of Christianity Patočka would say is a proper solution for this kind of crisis. But then there is the community. We can talk about the church as those who have this experience, who are in the world, and who move from one place to another. And for Patočka, this is important about Christianity, again, because in Christianity, you can somehow internalize this experience, incorporate this experience into your life without being a philosopher, without being an intellectual, and rationalize it. But you can live through it.
So the crisis in general is primarily internal for Patočka?
I would say it starts with the internal, with the existential crisis. And of course, all we meet in the world, and we think it's external, it's just different materialization or translations of this fundamental crisis. And important thing is, I think that this crisis is really universal. And yet it doesn't neglect our particularities. That there is no one solution for this crisis, but this crisis is something we can talk each other about it. We can move from there.
For an individual though who's fully of and born and subsumed into the super civilization, the radical modernity, might there for them actually not be a crisis, because their experience of the world is that's the normal they've developed from their intentions.
Absolutely, and that's the problem. That's what leads. That's what leads to tragedies, not to crises, but to tragedies. That you somehow create this feeling, this flow feeling for Patočka, that there is no crisis, that you can overcome the crisis. You can think about it politically, you can think about it just philosophically. All the debates in theology about post-metaphysical theology and overcoming metaphysics, it all presupposes that we can arrive at some kind of theology, for instance, which is metaphysic free. But yeah, you can criticize certain versions of metaphysics, certainly, as oppressive, totalitarian, whatever. But you need something.
I mean, that's beautiful. That's fantastic. So the tragedy isn't in, the real tragedy would be someone who truly believes they've found it. They found the absolute answer. That for Patočka would be completely tragic. And he doesn't. So I would say he doesn't see Christians as, because of that rationalization that Christians have as theology as a growing thing. Obviously, they're not. They don't believe they've found the exact truth. So the tragedy is really, the tragedy is modern people. Okay. So how does that form of freedom sort of allow us to approach the world in a new light? Which I guess is another way of asking, how can we use Patočka's work, to look at the world anew?
Mm-hmm. Towards the end of his professional life, Patočka was thinking about concept of the solidarity of the shaken, which is very much received in political theory, but I think it's existential in its basic idea. And this being shaken, that means exactly being somehow confronted with finitude. And but there is this solidarity, and solidarity means people coming together, intersubjective relationships, community, right? And Patočka doesn't propose any program, any political program, any program for Christianity, what Christianity has to be, but he inspires us, and that's what I draw from Patočka as theologian for, let's say, the religious community, but you can draw it as a political thinker for a public community. That, this solidarity of the shaken is solidarity which doesn't presuppose any kind of predefined solidity. That means that it's not necessarily I and my fellow countrymen who come together because we share the common national identity. It's not necessarily I and my fellow Christian brother or sister who come together because we are sharing our Christian identity. No, it's about our humanity. There is something universal in our humanity, which, again, I have to repeat it again and again, doesn't neglect our different particularities, that I'm a Christian, I'm a Czech, and someone else is an atheist and a French, for instance. But still, we are called to this solidarity of the shaken, which means that we try to figure out what's happening around us. What's the point of those things, and how shall we react? And of course, this is a bit situational for Patočka. It's there are no ahistorical truths. We have to come together. We have to see the situation, and we have to act accordingly. And it means that we can mistake. We can be mistaken. We can do something wrong. But that's because we are free. We can allow ourselves to fail. And again, it's about this idea of what the world is, or what the world should be. Are we about to create a perfect world for everyone? Yeah. Again, this is a tragedy. Certainly, somebody will be excluded, and this is a kind of thinking you can find, for instance, in other thinkers as well. Jean-François Lyotard and his postmodern theory is basically about this: who is being excluded when we pick one particular narrative as the leading narrative of our politics or our religious identity. Who is being excluded? Because there is always somebody being excluded. And Patočka brings it more on the existential level, that yes, our actions always exclude someone. But we can try to think, what does it mean when we do this, or what does it mean when we do that? Towards the end of his life, Patočka was this spokesperson of Charter 77, human rights movement, and he stood up for rock musicians, kind of freaks. Patočka was listening to Beethoven, and he said in one interview that he could listen to those rock bands for about 2 minutes before just driving him mad. But that's the point. He had nothing in common with those guys, with those hippie looking guys, just provoking the totalitarian regime with extraordinary music. But he felt this solidarity with them in their internal strive for meaning. In this particular sense, their strive to perform art, what they consider to be art. Even Patočka wouldn't consider it to be art. And I think this shows what we can draw from him for our Christianity as a community, which doesn't rely on sharing certain presuppositions, or which is based on the rational acceptance of certain opinions. He says it's more about our existential relationships and how we position ourselves in the world, not as individuals, but together.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think it is he's been somewhat overlooked in academia? Well,
on the one hand, there is a reception of Patočka even beyond the Czech Republic. So you can find, to my constant surprise, so many brilliant people learning this awful Czech language just to read Patočka. But on the other hand, of course, it's not the mainstream of philosophy. That's definitely true. And I think one reason is that his texts are very difficult. Mm-hmm. And the second reason is that even though there's plenty of translations into German and French, we are still lacking significant translations into English. So there are some. Mm-hmm. Most of them are good. But of course, if you do not have access to the entire work of the author, it's difficult to make sense of it. And with Patočka, you have another difficulty because he was not a systematic thinker. He started so many projects. Yeah, and that's again something related to his vision of the crisis, because of course, if there is this crisis, I have to react to that, and now I see something different, and I ask different questions, so I try to write something else. So you cannot say that there is this book, that book, that book. So it's his collected writings, which are published in Czech, almost in its entirety. It's mass. It's so many unfinished projects, and it's difficult. It's difficult to read him and to understand him. And people usually start with heretical essays in the philosophy of history because it's the most read and most known work of his. But it's very confusing. You know, if you do not know how this weird thinker named Patočka, how he thinks and writes, you read it and you are okay, I will think about it, and you never come back because it doesn't make, I don't want to say it doesn't make sense, it makes perfect sense, I think, but it's difficult, and but it's confusing for the Western readers, because you need to be aware of some of his early thinking on the nature of philosophy and what philosophy for him is. You need to know that what he was doing in the 50s and so on, and then it starts to make better sense, and you understand why this enigmatic language with in between line references and so on. So it's difficult. It's difficult to approach him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So is that where you would advise beginning heretical essays, or is there some other secondary works that, or is it just going to be a case of struggling through?
I wouldn't recommend to start with the heretical essays. Luckily, right now, Bloomsbury has published a new collection of English translations of Jan Patočka, It's called just the collected writings of Jan Patočka, and it's perhaps first volume of something bigger. I don't know the details, but I think this kind of collection can give the reader kind of overview, because there are not only phenomenological texts, not only texts related to his late period, and heretical essays come from this late period of his life. So you can get a sense of different approaches he applies to arts, to politics, to philosophy, to literature, to philosophy of history in the end, to something what's called care for the soul, let's say the way of conducting philosophical life. And once you get kind of overview what this thinker tries to encompass, because he's a classical philosopher, as I've said. He tries to do philosophy, not just one portion of philosophy, but philosophy for leading good life. So then you can move on with more specialized essays, such as heretical essays in the philosophy of history. But there will be, I can say, probably a very nice interpretation of heretical essays by David Dusenbury, my friend and colleague from Budapest, and I'm looking forward to reading that because that will be in English, and I think it will be a great introductory text.
Sounds good. Is there anything you'd like to add about your book or Patočka you feel that we should touch on that we haven't?
Well, I think we touched pretty much everything. I just want to say that in my first book, I was very much focused on Christianity as the mode of thinking with Patočka. That Patočka says, and it's even in my title of the book, Thinking Faith After Christianity. And now I'm just finishing my second book, and I'm trying to move beyond this focus on thinking and enlarge it with a broader scope of being. That because I think that's something I understand better right now after reading more of Patočka and also other thinkers, and to make sense of Christianity not only as a mode of thinking about certain things, but mode of being, mode of inhabiting this world. So taking Christianity not as a religion primarily, but as a kind of existential movement in the world. And I think this is why Patočka was so interested in Christianity, because in fact for him it was not a religion but an existential movement.
Wow. When how far are you into that book?
Well, I'm about to submit the manuscript, so I hope next year it will come out.
Wow. Yeah, I look forward to reading it and hearing about it. So whereabouts can we find Thinking Faith After Christianity? I'm assuming Amazon and also SUNY Press website. Martin Koci, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.